stop memorizing definitions.
Yes,
If you're
serious.
like just flipping through flashcards right now, you are preparing to fail the exam. And honestly, worse, you're preparing to fail your clients.
100%.
Today, we are completely ripping apart the clinical mechanics behind how humans actually learn to follow instructions. If you're prepping for your BCBA exam, you already know task lists G.10 and B.18.
Right, the basics.
Yeah, you got to design and evaluate instructions and distinguish between rule-governed and contingency-shaped behavior. But today, we aren't just reading the Cooper text to you.
No, absolutely not.
We're looking at the mock exams, the ethics code, and we're going to look at why these behaviors actually function the way they do in the human brain. So welcome to this deep dive. You are stepping into a higher tier of clinical preparation today.
That is exactly the mindset that an elite clinician brings to the table. There is zero room for fluff here. We are operating with a top 1% BCBAD coach mentality today. Because if you want to pass the exam and, more importantly, actually change lives in the clinic, you got to understand the underlying architecture of behavior.
Right. It's not just labels.
Exactly. We aren't just looking at what a behavior is called. We are analyzing why it functions that way in the environment. We need clinical precision, and we have to understand the exact logic that Pearson VUE uses to test these concepts.
Okay, so let's get straight into it. The source material talks a lot about instructions and rules, but let's define that clinically before we go any further.
Good call.
The sources give us this really elegant, simple definition. An instruction, or a rule, is just a verbal statement of a contingency.
Literally just, if you do X, then Y will happen.
Exactly. But the Cooper text emphasizes that this exists on a continuum. Like on one end, you have purely rule-governed behavior, so behavior controlled by that verbal description alone.
Right.
And on the other end, you have contingency-shaped behavior, which is controlled by perceived immediate consequences in your current environment.
And we need to make that super concrete for people.
Yeah. So think of contingency-shaped behavior, like driving a car by looking out your windshield at the physical road.
Yeah.
You are reacting to the direct, immediate reality right in front of you.
I love that analogy.
Right. But rule-governed behavior, on the other hand, is like driving by staring at your GPS. One is governed by direct physical reality, and the other is governed by a symbolic representation of that reality. So my question is, if the GPS says turn left, but your windshield shows a solid brick wall, which one takes over?
That's a phenomenal analogy, and it perfectly illustrates the mechanism of control here. With the windshield so contingency-shaped behavior, the environment is physically forcing the change right now. You touch a hot stove, you get burned instantly, you pull your hand away.
Right. Instant feedback.
Exactly. The contiguous pairing of the action and the immediate physical punisher biologically shapes the behavior. But with the GPS, the rule-governed verbal behavior is doing the heavy lifting.
It's all symbolic.
Yes. The control is exerted entirely by the description of the contingency. Your brain is processing a symbolic if-then statement, independent of any immediate environmental feedback.
Wait, okay, I have to push back on that, though. Let's look at a genuinely messy scenario from an actual clinic, because the real world isn't, as clean as a textbook.
Oh, definitely not. Bring it on.
What if I have a client who completely understands the verbal rule? Like, they could even repeat it back to me. They look right at me and say, no hitting, or I lose the ISET.
Okay, so they have the verbal operants.
Right, they have the verbal operants. But then
Right.
their impulsivity overrides it in the moment. They hit a peer, they lose the iPad, and then, only then, the hitting stops. Is their behavior still considered rule-governed because they actively knew and stated the rule? Or, is it a failure of the rule? How does the exam classify that?
See, that is the exact trap so many clinicians fall into.
Really?
Yes. They confuse the client's ability to state the rule with the behavior actually being governed by it. In your scenario, the rule fundamentally failed to govern the behavior.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The verbal statement, the GPS, to use your analogy, exerted zero functional control over the actual motor action of hitting. It was only when the client directly experienced the punisher looking out the windshield and hitting the brick wall by losing the iPad that the behavior actually changed.
Because they actually contacted the consequence.
Precisely. Because the immediate consequence is what modified the behavior, it is officially contingency-shaped. The rule was present in the environment, sure, but it was functionally irrelevant to the actual behavior change.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense. The mechanism of change is what dictates the label, not just the presence of the words.
Exactly.
Let's bring this into some community settings to really cement it for everyone listening. The sources provide a classic scenario about a playground bridge.
Yes, the bridge scenario. It perfectly isolates these variables. So imagine a child is standing at the edge of a tall playground bridge. A caregiver says, hey, if you jump off that bridge, you will hurt yourself.
Right, setting the rule.
Setting the rule. Now, if the child has never jumped off a bridge before, has literally never experienced the pain of a fall, but they step back and avoid jumping based solely on that verbal warning, their behavior is entirely rule-governed.
Because the symbolic representation of pain controlled the behavior.
Exactly.
But, okay, if they look at the drop, decide the rule is bogus, and jump anyway, they hit the ground, scrape their knee, start crying, and then they never jump off the bridge again. That's contingency-shaped.
Yes, because they had to actually contact the physical reality of the consequence for the learning to happen. The pain of the scraped knee served as the immediate positive punisher. Moving forward, their refusal to jump is contingency-shaped.
I love the traffic light example for this, too, especially for understanding how these two mechanisms, compete against each other.
Oh, the traffic light is perfect.
Right. Think about driving late at night. You come to a red light in the middle of absolutely nowhere. There are no other cars, no traffic cameras, no cops. But you stop and wait for 2 minutes anyway. That is rule-governed behavior.
100%.
The rule red means stop or you get a ticket, is literally controlling the muscles in your leg, pressing the brake pedal.
And let's look at the mechanism there clinically. The immediate environment is actually punishing you with a delay.
Yeah.
You want to go home, but you're stuck at a light. The only thing keeping you there is a verbal rule.
Right. But if you look around, notice that the environment is completely empty. Realize you absolutely won't get caught and you step on the gas to run the red light. Your behavior shifts.
It shifts to contingency-shaped.
Exactly. You escaped the wait time because the immediate environment signaled it was safe to do so. The rule lost its control, and the immediate negative reinforcement of escaping the red light took over.
That brings up a really critical dimension that you must understand for the exam, and that is time.
Time. Okay, break that down.
The dimension of time is the enemy of contingency-shaped behavior. Delayed consequences are a massive neon indicator of rule-governed behavior. The sources highlight this studying for grades example in a school setting.
Oh yeah, the massive delay.
Right. When you study for a final exam, you are working hard for months. There is a massive delay between the physical action of studying on, say, a Tuesday night in October and the consequence of getting an A on your report card in December.
Which is agonizing.
Extremely. The immediate environment is highly effortful and punishing. You're missing out on sleep, you're skipping social lines.
So mechanically, the human brain simply cannot pair a Tuesday study session with a December grade without verbal behavior mediating it, right?
Precisely. The biological limits of contiguity literally prevent the environment from directly shaping that behavior over a 2-month gap. Because the consequence is so delayed, the behavior of studying simply cannot be contingency-shaped.
It has to rely on the internal narrative.
Yes. If I do this now, I will get into grad school later. It is a classic, undeniable example of rule-governed behavior.
But that exact logic right there, the fact that a delayed consequence changes the whole classification, is exactly what the exam writers use to trick people.
Oh, they love to trick people with this.
They really do. They know you'll scan the question looking for an immediate reward, so they just hide it. Let's break down the common mistakes, starting with trap number 1, overcomplicating the rule.
This happens all the time.
I want to pull a specific scenario straight from mock exam 3. So you are staying late at work, you put your coffee cup in the sink, and you see a sign taped to the wall that says, "Your mother doesn't work here. Please clean up your own mess." And in response, you immediately wash your cup.
And test takers completely freeze up on this scenario.
They really do.
They see that simple sign and they start frantically digging through their mental glossary. They think, wait, is this a behavioral contract? Is it behavioral contrast? Is it like some form of dependent group contingency?
Right. They look for the most complex, jargon-heavy ABA terminology available.
Exactly, because they assume a simple piece of paper couldn't possibly be the answer to a master's level exam question.
So why do exam writers do that? Why write questions that seem almost too simple?
To test if you can see the forest for the trees, they want to know if you actually understand the fundamental mechanism of behavior change or if you're just hunting for buzzwords.
Gotcha.
We have to cut through the noise. That sign is simply a rule. It is a verbal statement, in this case written, that implies a contingency. Clean up your mess or you violate workplace norms and face social disapproval.
It's that simple.
Don't overcomplicate the basics. If a verbal or written statement changes behavior without a formal multi-party contract being signed and monitored, it's just a rule.
That brings us perfectly to trap number 2, the assumption that immediate consequences are always required for an analysis.
This is a huge trap.
There is a scenario in mock exam 1 about a little girl named Annabelle. Her parents tell her, "You'll be in big trouble if you open presents before Christmas." The trap here is that people read this and start desperately searching the paragraph for the immediate reinforcer or the immediate punisher.
Which is exactly what Pearson v. UE wants you to do.
They want you spinning your wheels.
They do. They want you looking for the immediate contingency. But here's the secret. You know, a behavior is the result of rule following, specifically when there hasn't yet been any punishment or reinforcement for the behavior.
Not even automatic reinforcement.
Not even automatic. Annabelle hasn't opened a present. She hasn't been yelled at. She hasn't been praised for waiting. There is simply a rule in effect. If she refrains from touching the presents based solely on that threat of future trouble, that is the literal definition of rule-governed behavior. You do not need to identify an immediate consequence to correctly analyze that behavior.
Okay, so let's translate this into the architecture of the exam itself. When you are sitting at the computer, staring at a convoluted scenario, you need to understand the logic that test writers are using.
The matrix, basically.
Right. I was looking at the mock exams, and they seem absolutely obsessed with this 30-second window. The Cooper text points this out too. If consequences are delayed by more than 30 seconds, choose rule-governed behavior. Why 30 seconds? Like, is that just an arbitrary number the BCB made up to make our lives difficult?
It is not arbitrary at all. 30 seconds is the accepted clinical threshold for contiguity. Mechanically, the human brain requires the consequence to occur almost immediately after the response for the environment to effectively pair the two.
So what's a biological limit?
Exactly. If the consequence happens 31 seconds later, or 3 hours, or 3 days later, the environment can no longer physically shape the behavior. The gap is too wide. The brain has moved on to other stimuli.
Wow.
Therefore, if a behavior changes based on a consequence that is delayed by more than 30 seconds, it must be mediated by verbal behavior. The client is internally telling themselves the rule to bridge that time gap.
That makes total sense. So it's not rote memorization, it's actually understanding the biological limits of the learner.
Yes.
Let's look at another exam marker. The sources state, if behavior changes without any prior reinforcement, choose rule-governed behavior.
Again, look at the mechanism. If there is absolutely no history of reinforcement for that specific behavior in that specific context, the environment hasn't had the opportunity to shape it. Contingency shaping requires a history of contact with consequences.
It takes time.
Right. So if a client performs a complex task perfectly on the very first try after you explain it, that change must be driven by your verbal behavior, not their environmental history.
The last marker is the one that really trips people up. If a single instance of reinforcement causes a massive, disproportionate increase in the frequency of the behavior, choose rule-governed behavior. Can you unpack why a massive spike means it's a rule? Because a lot of people see reinforcement and immediately think contingency-shaped.
Think about how contingency shaping actually works in practice. It is a gradual process. It requires successive approximations and a steady, repeated history of reinforcement. The behavior slowly trends upward on your graph.
Like a slow build.
Exactly. But let's say a client receives one single token for doing a math worksheet, and suddenly, overnight, they complete 50 math worksheets.
That's a massive jump.
That massive instant spike means the client internally generated a rule. Their brain said, oh, I understand the contingency now. Doing worksheets equals tokens. I will do all the worksheets.
So they figured out the rule.
Yes. The internal verbal rule is driving that massive 50x increase, not the single isolated instance of reinforcement.
This is so crucial because it dictates everything we do in practice. If you misidentify the source of control, your intervention will fail. Like, if a client's behavior is contingency-shaped, you have to manipulate the immediate physical environment. But if it's rule-governed, manipulating the environment might do nothing. You have to address the verbal rules they're following.
Absolutely. You're wasting your time otherwise.
Right. So let's transition this into our clinical power insight. This is the advanced thinking that separates people who just pass tests from elite top 1% clinicians.
Let's do it.
Let's connect this theory to daily practice. The ultimate goal of an instruction is for it to become a discriminative stimulus, an SD. When I ask a client to turn out the lights, I am providing a verbal instruction, but I intentionally create a reinforcement-rich environment. Maybe I praise them immediately after, so that my words become a reliable SD that signals the availability of reinforcement.
Yes, and let's look at the mechanics of how we build that. When we start early skill acquisition with a client, relying exclusively on immediate contingency-shaped reinforcement is absolutely necessary.
Right, the early days.
We use continuous FR1 schedules, meaning a strict 1-to-1 ratio where one correct response equals one immediate edible or tangible. You touch the correct card, you immediately get a Skittle. That is how we build early repertoires. But mechanically, that creates a trap.
Because the client's brain becomes entirely wired to expect the immediate physical payoff?
Precisely. If you leave a client on an FR1 schedule, you are keeping them trapped in contingency-shaped behavior. You create a hard ceiling on their independence.
And what happens outside the clinic?
Their independence will flatline the moment they enter the real world because the real world does not operate on continuous FR1 edible schedules. Nobody hands you a Skittle for tying your shoes at age 20. True clinical power comes from designing interventions that systematically fade those immediate contingencies.
You have to build the bridge.
You must build the bridge. You have to teach the client to respond to rules and delayed instructions. You must bridge the gap from a highly contrived, contingency-shaped clinical environment to the naturalistic environment.
Which is full of delays.
The natural world operates almost entirely on delayed reinforcers, paychecks at the end of the week, report cards at the end of the semester, social inclusion after months of being a good friend. If you cannot mechanically transition your client's behavior from being governed by the immediate windshield to being governed by the verbal GPS, you are failing to prepare them for contact with naturalistic reinforcers.
Fading the artificial to access the natural. That is the entire point of what we do. Which leaves me with a final challenge for you to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. Think about the clients you are working with tomorrow. If their behavior is entirely dependent on immediate, continuous contingencies, are you truly preparing them for a world that operates almost exclusively on delayed rules and implicit instructions?
It's a tough question.
It is. And clinically, how do you assess if your client even possesses the complex verbal operants necessary for rule-governed behavior to take effect in the first place? Because you can't just throw rules at a client who doesn't have the verbal repertoire to process them.
No, you definitely cannot.
If this helped you, follow behavioral intelligence, share this episode with another RBT or BCBA who's studying, and leave a comment or review. That's how we grow and how I keep creating high-level content for you.
At Amethyst Therapy Services, Inc., we build clinicians, not just test passers. Visit us at www.amethysttherapyservices.com or email us at info@amethysttherapyservices.com.